Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Leader Living Life podcast. This is your host, Eric, and we've got some great guests with us today that we're going to talk through this article written by Sabina about don't just memorize your next presentation, know it cold. And this really resonated with me on a lot of levels, and we'll get into that here after introduction. So, Alex, would you kick us off with an intro?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Alex. I'm a junior at UNCC studying computer science with a concentration in cybersecurity.
Awesome. Lisa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Cantrell. I'm a director of sales operations for an enterprise level software company. I've been in operational roles for about 15 years with my current company for 8. And I love this topic. Presenting in front of small and large groups is something that I struggle with. So I'm excited to be a part of the panel today.
Yeah, Lisa, if you get comfortable with the topic, there's a particular blooper you shared with me one time that is to die for, but I don't want you to feel bad having to talk about it. But
I am prepared and willing.
All right. Well, you can bring that one up whenever it seems appropriate.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And Sabina, could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on this show, Eric. My name is Sabina Nawaz. I work with CEOs as an executive coach one-on-one and with their teams, do leadership training, keynote speeches for conferences, large and small, and then write on leadership topics for Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Inc., Thrive Global, and so on.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Let's start with, everybody loves the origin story. Could you give us a little bit of background, Sabina, on what provoked this article? And I'll share a link when we put the podcast up for the listeners to go get it. But could you kind of give us like the impetus, like what provoked this or motivated you to write this article?
Great question, Eric. I write articles multiple times a week. And this is a topic that has been plaguing me for most of my life. The topic being how to really gain mastery over what you're saying, how you're presenting. And by presenting, I don't just mean a big conference keynote for an audience of 10,000 people. We are always presenting. I am presenting right now. Any conversation, any dialogue we have with another human being is a presentation. And this really, the origin started for me very early on, which you'll see in the article as well. When I was in undergrad, I think I was even younger than you, Alex. I think I was a freshman or a sophomore, and there was this elocution competition. And I usually nailed those. I did really well at them. And so walked up to the stage quite cocky, and my brain went completely blank. In the freezer, in the deep freeze. There was just no recovery whatsoever. And after the timer went off, I got off the stage. What was even more heartbreaking was the judges who had seen me in previous competitions said that if you had even gotten off of stage, gone to the poetry book, brought it back on stage and simply read it out loud, we would still have given you second prize.
Yeah. And that's, I would love to, if we could just do a quick diversion on that point. This is something I've had to learn the hard way, but also I try to coach people on. When you're presenting, it's surprising how forgiving your audience is to the imperfection of what you're doing, and it's fine. I try to create a laughable moment out of it by making fun of myself. Right, the only safe humor is self-deprecating. And I'll say, oh, geez, I just forgot that point. Let me get my notes here. I'm sure you guys came to see me forget everything. And I'll pick myself up and shift away from that harsh self-judgment, because the audience is engaged in what you're saying. And they're generally missing these small faux pas. And it isn't a bad thing to break it up with a bit of humor sometimes, even if it's around something like walking off the stage to get the book and come back.
So that actually reminds me of a TED Talk that actually one of my public speaking professors had showed me a year or two ago by a doctor by the name of Hayten Patel. And he starts off the TED Talk by sitting on stage next to an interpreter. And for the entire intro, he speaks in Mandarin, but he doesn't tell anybody. He's repeating the exact same phrase over and over again. And then the interpreter is reading what he had written for her as his intro. And the title of that TED Talk is actually, I want to say it's called Who Am I? Think Again. And it talks about how if you can keep people engaged, they will miss a lot of things that you may think are obvious, like repeating the exact same phrase over and over again.
And it's not just keeping people engaged with, because we also know that a lot of what we say are not just the brilliant words that are coming out of our mouths. It's how we say it, our nonverbals, our level of engagement with the audience, our level of awakeness, if that's a word, to really connect with the audience. Eric, I'd like to take a couple more detours on that diversion that you mentioned.
Yes, please do.
This is going to be a talk about Sabina living out all her traumas.
We will join you very openly.
Well, one of the talks I gave, and this is after I'd totally drunk the Kool-Aid of knowing your script cold, and we can talk later about the difference between knowing it cold and memorization. And so I was doing professional keynote speaking for a while, and I don't know what happened that morning. It was an off morning. The setup was very different. It was a circular setup where you're not facing an audience at any one point. You have to kind of go around. And I don't know what else was going on, but I felt very shaky. And it wasn't just the shakiness that only the speaker notices because it's so small, but it feels like an eon. It was obvious. And I knew it was obvious because the person who'd invited me kept looking at me and smiling in that very encouraging way, which of course made it all worse. And at that point, I had not gained enough mastery to do what you did, Eric, which is say, which I always do nowadays if I get into that position, which is say, oh gosh, I don't know why I'm feeling so shaky this morning. How many of you here? And then say something to connect with the audience. The audience actually wants you to succeed. They're there to hear you deliver a good speech. But one of the ways to make it relatable, to make it engaging with the audience, is actually show that you're human, not that you're superhuman. And I don't know if this is true, but I read somewhere that Winston Churchill, who was the master of over-preparedness, would even insert deliberately ums and ahs into his script in specific timing so that he looked more human.
That's great. I've had that scenario where I'm coming up and preparing to speak and nerves kind of get me.
Yes.
And I know people can see it. And I'll say something like, I'm just so excited to be here to talk to you guys today. Can you see how fired up I am? It's a couple of things. One, I'm converting emotionally myself from a lack of a confidence to excitement.
Yes.
You know, and preaching to myself a bit. And also helping the audience understand how grateful I am for them to be there and for my opportunity. So transitioning the way we think about how we feel has a lot to do with the outcome. If we're nervous and we're like, oh my God, I'm so nervous because I know I'm going to blow this and that. And all of a sudden we talk ourselves into failure. And if you can just get just a little bit of a grasp on your emotions and say, I'm going to flip this. I feel this way because I'm just so excited. I've worked so hard for the opportunity to be able to speak to these people. I'm just excited. I'm not afraid.
That's great. Yes. In coaching jargon, we call that reframing. You're taking one frame and making it a different frame, and that trains your brain to go into a different place as well. That's great.
I'd love to tell you I'm perfect at it, but I mess it up on a pretty regular basis. But I understand the concept and I try.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I think that's, I just learned something new. So thank you, because I didn't have that tool in my belt. And that is something that I often struggle with, is particularly in large groups. You've got a mic in your hand and your hand's shaking, and you want to acknowledge it, but not knowing how to acknowledge it without sabotaging yourself right at the start.
Yeah, that's a powerful way of describing sabotage yourself, because that's really what it comes down to. If we allow ourselves to, if self-doubt creeps in, man, that's so hard to overcome. So we reframe it as self-confidence and excitement. And did you ever witness that, Lisa? When I was so Lisa was a client of mine, and so I had the opportunity to speak in front of groups while she was there. I'm sure that happened. Did it ever resonate with you, or did it ever stick in your memory?
No, I don't recall having that that feeling or that notion when you guys were presenting to us. Never.
And I think that's a good point. And it's back to what you were saying, Sabina. The listeners, they want you to succeed. They're not generally focused on where you might be working hard.
Yes. So from the origin story, it's really about that one first traumatic experience where I thought I was going to just be home free, and it plopped, to then actually sabotaging myself by getting into my head and getting overly anxious of, it's going to fail again. I'm going to have that freeze moment again, to not quite knowing what to do with it, then deciding to wing it, then that not working so well one time, to where I am right now. But it's taken me decades to get to a place of understanding of how you can master your script, how you know exactly what you need to do.
Could you kind of maybe dig into that a bit? Because I think it's an important part of the article. And you highlight there's a big difference between memorization, which can totally let you down, and actual mastery or knowing it cold. Could you kind of explain to folks what you mean by that, or how you came about that?
Yeah, and memorization can be one tool or one thing that you do. I absolutely do that for my keynotes or my TEDx talk, for example. But if you do memorization, you have to do it way past any idea of how long you think it's going to take to memorize. Most people, the reason memorization lets most people down is they don't spend enough time memorizing. My TEDx talk, which is, I think, a little shy of 20 minutes, took me 200 hours of memorization time.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about, is it backwards and forwards. As Michelle Obama said in her book that I just finished reading, that she knew where every comma was in one of her talks. That's not for everybody, and that is not for everything. We obviously cannot afford to take that much time in everything that we're doing. This is for a TEDx talk. This is for a major keynote, or a keynote that I'm going to do over and over and over again. But the idea with memorization is still to be able to let go of it and the details once you get up on stage, because once I have it memorized, I can then build upon what the previous speaker may have said, or something unexpected that happened that day, or something that's going on in the audience in the moment. The more I know it and absorb it in my DNA, the more I can let it go. Now that's, as I said, just one aspect of things. But knowing things cold can be different, can have many different paths to it. One of it is simply knowing what you're going to say, not just what you're going to say, but what the audience is what you want the audience to take away. If you ever want a humbling experience, speak and then go ask people 2 days later what they remember,
Yeah.
what they took away of what you said. When I was working at Microsoft, we had a big all hands, and the leadership team had worked many, many hours to put together our presentation. And we thought we were doing great stuff, and we were so excited about it. And we did this big all hands. And just the same, I believe it was the same day, or maybe it was just the day after, but less than 24 hours later, I walked the hallways to find out what people took away. And they took away zero.
Yeah.
Zero. One metaphor that I had used, people remembered, but they didn't quite remember why I was using that metaphor even.
Right.
So you need to work backwards to say, what do I want these people to take away? If I went and asked them, or if I were a fly on the wall, if I'm, say, talking to a client, and then the client is going and talking to their team, how are they going to describe what they heard from me?
Mm-hmm.
What are the 3 things they're going to say? And then build your content from those 3 things, not from the 3 things you want to say, but the 3 things that you want them to say.
Right. And there's a couple of studies around that suggest that within 24 hours, people retain about 10%.
Yes.
If you're lucky.
Yes.
So if I try to think about, okay, I'm going to probably say 1,000 words. What 100 words that they need to know tomorrow?
That's
Do they
great.
need to be able to recall? And if you think it needs to be that they retain 1,000, you can't solve that by making your presentation 10,000 words long. Okay, you have to focus on a message and the shaping and crafting of that message in a way that you get some degree of retention on the core points, and it goes into how you structure a presentation and all that other stuff. But if you hit 10% in 24 hours, you're doing amazing. So, that's part of how I try to think about what's my content going to be.
That's brilliant. That's great, because if you're focused on those 100 words, they're really going to shine and sparkle.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I found, Eric, to accelerate that retention is to engage people's emotions.
Okay.
If you saw that movie Inside Out, where our memories are stored in emotions, and not just because a Disney movie said so. And so there's tons of stuff out there about the power of storytelling. And why do we remember stories? Because they engage us emotionally. Mm-hmm. Another technique, if you're giving a talk, is first start with the problem. Yeah. And scare the bejesus out of people. So now I'm scared, I'm listening, not only in the moment, but I'm going to remember it, because there's clear and present danger, and you're telling me how to address that.
Yeah, and you create this desire for a solution. So now they're looking for, okay, how are we going to get out of this mess? And they look for that 100 words.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's something I've been fortunate enough that I've had a lot of professors in my past year or so who understand the importance of good public speaking skills and the ability to talk in front of groups. So I've had a lot of opportunities to screw this up and learn from it. And one of the things I had to do recently was record a video lecture explaining a topic. In this case, it was subnet masks. But what I wanted to start with for this is I looked at it as if I was the person who would be viewing it, or the person who'd be watching the video. And I started off with, what are the top 3 things that are important to know about this? So my very first slide were 3 questions without any further explanation. And then I went through and answered each question step by step in the order they appeared on the first slide. I know you were talking about presenting the problem, something along those lines. Is that an effective way to do that? Or is there something else I should have done, some other way I should have gone about that?
I think 3 questions are great. Without knowing the questions, I don't know, but one of the things that questions do is actually start to make it more of a participative dialogue like we are having here, versus you just lecturing. nobody really likes to hear lectures, no matter, and
Amen.
our staying power is very, very short, much shorter than we think, especially when we have gadgets and gadgets competing for
Mhm.
our attention. So questions are a great way to get people to start doing the work. And so you're not the hardest working person in the room.
Yeah, that's great. Sabina, could you talk a bit about the concept of creating natural sections in your presentations or speeches?
Yes, I learned about the concept of natural sections in theater. When I was at Microsoft, my husband and I started a small theater company, and we took a lot of classes in drama. And our teacher had talked about this notion of beats, which in the script of a play are where a beat comprises sort of like a paragraph. It comprises one thing, and then you're moving on to another beat, which is another thing. And so similarly, when you're talking and you've got some amount of content to get through, dividing it up into specific sections so that there is a transition between section A, section B, section C. And that transition can mean anything from a pause to Alex using clever questions to asking permission of your audience, or whether they're ready to move on to something else and do a big pivot, to pausing and saying, before we move on to topic X or subtopic X, I'm curious, what are you taking away from topic A?
Right.
And that is another way to getting the audience to repeat what you've said, to get them to solidify what they're taking away, and also giving you immediate feedback on what they're taking away. Is that mapping? Is there fidelity between what you wanted them to take away and what they're actually taking away? So you can then do some adjustments on the fly as you move forward.
Yeah, that I need to definitely improve my focus on that. I think it happens a bit unconsciously for me. I'm a collaborator. I love interactive. I'm not a huge fan of like being the only voice in the room. So I love setting up like in a horseshoe shape. I love being on my feet and moving around and interacting with people. And maybe I'm curious on your perspective. Maybe this is a jerk move. I don't intend it to be, but as I get through that point, I'm looking. I'll ask, does this make sense? Is this clicking with you guys? But I like to be close to my audience. I like to be in the midst of them. And it's amazing how people start paying attention because they're a little worried about what you're going to call on them next. But it creates that engagement selfishly for me because I need that back and forth. That's just my wiring. But I think that I am creating those sections, but I could do a much better job of breaking my presentation down and having a more structured breakpoint, because maybe there's too many of them, maybe there's not enough of them. But that's a great point, and that's something I'll definitely be working on.
Eric, it's quite evident that you're a collaborator just from the quality of this interaction and conversation.
Oh, thank you.
And I would say that you can create 3 to 5, say, structured breakpoints, and then the conversation will naturally create some breakpoints where you didn't even expect them. But if you've trained yourself on the idea of breakpoints, that you're not just going to be rattling on nonstop, you'll be able to handle that better because you've developed that mastery. And so 2 things there. One, it reminds me of some cooking competitions. We love to watch those in our house. And
Same here.
this Cutthroat Kitchen where you've got these expert chefs, and then they're given these impossible odds, like swing from a canopy and create bananas Foster.
Out of rocks and bark.
Right, and they create something that looks wonderful because they have that mastery. They have the muscle strength on their topic to be able to do it while swinging from a trapeze.
Yep.
Your question about, does this make sense, or is it clicking for you? Are you open to some feedback on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what you're saying, then ties in with what you were saying, which is it makes me feel good.
Mhm.
And I would say that that question is not as helpful. It is helpful in getting you reassurance. It is not as helpful in landing the point with your audience. It might give them a slight pause, which is great, so they can process the information. However, how many of them are going to say, no, this doesn't make sense? Or no,
None.
this is, or, right.
It's
Or
kind of a bully tactic. I don't mean
yeah,
it to be, but
exactly.
yeah.
But actually, some of my crustier audiences, they might say, yeah, it's not making sense. And then you get into this sort of negative spiral. And most of them are not going to say it's not clicking for them, because then they're going to expose that they may not be as smart as you think they are. And instead, I would ask, what's striking you? What are you taking away right now? What surprised you? What did you learn here?
Yeah, those are all much better questions.
So make the question more specific as opposed to looking for reassurance, because
Yeah,
that what did you learn is also going to give you reassurance, but now it's going to give you more quality information.
Yep, that's great advice. And you know, I guess I have to reframe it in really the question has to be to the benefit of the listener,
Yes.
not the speaker.
Yes.
So that's another thing I'm going to invest more time on is the natural sections, and how do I create that two-way dialogue with questions that are listener focused and not me focused.
Awesome.
But I think too, just to add to that, you know, having been on the receiving end of, you know, some of those interactions with you, particularly Eric, is I think, you know, sometimes to create an opportunity for the audience to ask additional questions. And maybe it goes back to knowing your content cold, because I know, you know, we've had scenarios where you've asked me that question and I have said, didn't quite follow what you're talking about, you know, and you pivoted very quickly and made it clear. So then I did come away with something that you intended me to come away with.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the investment in the relationship. So we had time to develop mutual respect, and that I would never be blown up by a critical comment from you. Like it just wouldn't strike me as anything other than an opportunity for me to improve. And hopefully you also develop that mutual trust that I would never say or do anything to embarrass or disrespect you, particularly in front of a group. It's a little tougher when it's a group you just don't know. But as I'm saying it out loud, the principles should still carry, right? Yeah. We should never, again, it's safe, self-deprecating humor is fine, but we have to be very careful not to unintentionally embarrass somebody in front of their peers. So back to Sabina's point about me doing a better job of structuring my questions, it's a much better question of, hey, what's clicking with you? What surprised you? Because it doesn't set them up to not know in front of their peers, you know? So now I feel like I'm the one taking all the benefit away from this.
Well, actually, Lisa, that's a great point too. I want to underscore it, which is another way to create those segments is soliciting questions from them. Back to, you don't have to be the hardest working person there. What questions do you have? Not, do you have any questions? Because again, that's going to result in some silence. And then maybe somebody asking a question, depending on your audience. Some are not shy, but many are. But what questions do you have? So how you frame the question or the interaction on that segment will yield different kinds of responses.
Yeah, I love that.
So something I've done in the past, which could be entirely incorrect, by the way, but whenever I have to have like a Q&A session after I do a presentation, because as I've said, I've been needing to do this with increasing frequency as I get later into my classes, is I talk about the topic itself and my understanding of the topic, like saying, I understand it's a complex topic. There's a lot to talk about, and I probably missed something. I'm like, is there something you guys heard that maybe you'd like more information on, or is there something that could be clarified? Again, because I know it's a difficult topic to understand the first time.
That's awesome, Alex, because who here has mastery on any topic? We are all learning beings. We learn our way through life, through subjects. None of us has full mastery. So it's great that you have the self-assurance, is how I would interpret it, to say, this is what I know. It's my gift to the universe, and I've likely missed certain things. And also not just mastery on the topic or knowing things. I might know other things, but what's most useful to you? So pausing to get that from them is also really useful. One of the things we see with people who have mastery and are experts sometimes go too far down a rabbit hole where they've gone into details that nobody really cares about, nor are they tracking on. And it's so much better to stop and say, here's a menu. Now, which course would you like? And which dish in that course would you really like us to get into the details of?
Yeah, absolutely. I see Lisa laughing. I know that I can be guilty of that from time to time, and I try to catch myself.
We all are.
Sabina, before I'd like to kind of provoke some thoughts around the last 2 points that are in here about not rehearsing start to finish, having a plan for forgetfulness, and I guess it kind of ties back to probably multiple parts in here. It's taken me decades as well to get okay. Like I have a lot to learn and a lot of growth to do, and I'm okay with that. Like that's what I enjoy, that opportunity to learn and grow. But one of the things that has really been life-changing for me, this is going back 10 or 15 years, was really working hard on identifying my values, my beliefs, and my aspirational behaviors, and integrating them into how I deal with the world around me. And I have found that the further along I got with that, the better I was on my feet, because the messaging and where I wanted to go was coming very much from my core. So the emotional content, the engagement in the topic became much clearer for me, and it made it a lot easier for me to deal with if I forgot something, because one of my values is I embrace imperfection. So I didn't judge myself. I was imperfect at it, and that was okay. And the same way for those around me, I don't judge them for imperfection. It's okay. We're all there. So I can focus more on the kind of the technical details of what I'm presenting, the content, with this platform behind it that's been kind of hard fought, to have your values, your beliefs, and your aspirational behaviors well thought out and well grounded, mm-hmm. as a platform for you to deliver your message. And I think that goes into a lot of what I don't think I'm bringing something new into the article, because I think you kind of start digging into that idea of the practice and the rehearsing and really ingraining. When you get on stage, do you feel your presentation, or do you remember your presentation?
Yes.
And I think they're very different experiences for the listener.
Yes. And Eric, by the way, that was a perfect example in action of segmenting, where you said, I'm going to move towards these last 2 points in the article.
Okay.
And then you couched it with this. You essentially created a segmentation right there. And what that does is, for me, for example, now I'm more prepared to think, okay, we're pivoting next to this thing. What do I have to say about it? And gives me some time to put my thoughts together as well.
Thank you.
So prediction is a great way to create segments.
Okay. See, like I said, I'm the one that's getting all the coaching today. I hope it's just as helpful for the listeners, and it's not selfishly just good for Eric.
Yes. And I love what you're saying. Yes. So being firmly rooted in the 3 things you want the audience to take away, being firmly rooted in what do I value, what is most important to me in this moment, so I can keep myself, my ego, my fears, my self-sabotage, whatever it is, out of the way. Being firmly rooted in my values, so if all else fails, I go back to first principles and speak to those. All leave me whole and give more to my audience. I love what you were saying there, Eric.
Lisa, how do you feel about it?
I think they're all fair points. I mean, I like the predictability. I like, setting up the audience and engaging it. One question that I would ask of Sabina is, to what extent you talked about the practicing, right? And if the 200 hours or and preparing, what advice would you give to someone who, maybe you're presenting to the same audience, time and time again, and maybe you made a mistake, and maybe you had a swear word in your presentation, and got a big laughter from the group, and then you're going to go and present to that same group over and over again, and you find that you're because you made the mistake, it was a roaring laughter. People bring up the mistake ongoing, and then you go and present again and you make the same mistake, and you've practiced and you've prepared. Mm-hmm. How do you coach people to overcome those types of situations? Right.
And was it truly a mistake, Lisa?
It was. So in my instance, it was a large group. It was around 100 people in the room, much larger than I normally present to. And the audience was unfamiliar. So it was right after a merger acquisition process. And so half of the attendees in the room, this was the first time we were engaging.
Yes.
And there was a typo in my slide. And what was meant to say lift and shift.
Yes. Okay.
Was missing an F.
It is amazing how common that typo is.
No.
I knew when you said typo, I'm like, I bet it's shift that was missing the F.
And I had prepared and had practiced and had read it so many times that it didn't register that it was wrong. And so the audience started chuckling before I even knew what was happening.
Yes. And so then your question is, how do you prevent that from happening over and over again? Or is that right?
It is. So, flash forward, same audience this year. And, over the course of the year, it was a joking point, right? So we would have all hands meetings and somebody else would have lift and shift on their screen and they would say, ha, 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 or as Lisa likes to say, right?
Became a brand, yeah.
It did, hashtag, we got t-shirts, the whole thing. So then this year, same audience, similar presentation, no swear words, but I still made mistakes, right? Like I still, instead of saying part, I said something and not part.
Right.
You have little boys. That's okay.
I do. It's potty humor, but I feel like, I don't know what advice you would give to folks to try and not repeat, or maybe you acknowledge it at the beginning of the presentation. I don't know.
So firstly, I would say, don't work on what you don't want to do, work on what you do want to do. As my friend Karen says, energy flows where attention goes. My husband, who's a phenomenal driver, and I'm just sort of middle of the road, driver, no pun intended, told me, do not look, when you're passing a semi, don't look at the semi. Look at the road ahead of you, and then you'll be less nervous passing them. So what's the road ahead? And the minute you think, oh, I don't want to screw up, I don't want another potty word to show up, I don't, what do you want? So that's one way to shift your thinking with an F in where you're going and keeping that focus there. Another one is to totally embrace it. And you don't know that there's going to be some mistake, but you're afraid there might be, because this has become so ingrained that how could it not be? I could almost predict that that's going to happen. You will, of course, do a spell check on the word shift, but then part shows up or something else, hoop shows up. And so what you might do at the beginning is say, who knew that we would have started a whole new hashtag as part of our acquisition over the past year? My goal today is to give birth to a new hashtag. And then go on with your talk.
Yep.
And if hoop or part doesn't show up, that's okay. People will forget and forgive. And if it does, you've already set them up for it.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. You know, and I did try to do that at the beginning of the presentation. I did tell the audience that there was a swear word in my presentation, and that I had a prize for whoever found it.
That's good.
That's awesome.
And there wasn't a swear word. But anyway, that's helpful. Thank you.
Lisa, if I could just comment, my advice to people on it's more than just speaking, right? Is to be wary of self-talk. So our mind doesn't realize the difference between what we imagine and what really happened. And so we get in this scenario and we've already talked our brain into going, oh, I know what's coming. Because our brain wants to protect us and it wants to be able to predict the outcome and navigate it. So when we ruminate the night before, like, oh my God, I'm so stressed about this and that, and what we're doing is we're doing this self-talk and we're preloading that stress reaction so that when we walk in that room, our brain goes, oh, I know this story. And all of a sudden we find ourselves engaged. So, and again, I'm imperfect at this, by the way. This is a difficult thing to develop. But I try to take control of my self-talk. And sometimes it's at the last minute. So I have some rehearsed things. They're just short. And maybe they only work for me. I don't know. But there are times where I'll tell myself, Eric, you deserve to be here. You worked hard for the opportunity to be here. Now set aside all that nonsense and let's take advantage. You wanted this. This wasn't forced on you. You put yourself in this position because this is what you want and you earned it. And it's amazing for me how it will squash the night before's imagination of failure in whatever the scenario. So I would say to the audience, master your self-talk. Come up with whatever works for you, whatever story you want to tell yourself. In this case, I'd say have those couple sentences memorized. Like really work on them, refine them, define that message to you that gets you back on plane for whatever task is before you. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
yeah, absolutely.
And then Lisa, going back to what you had said about sort of bringing levity to the situation when you're presenting to the same group of people, especially from the perspective of somebody who spends a lot more time in the audience of somebody speaking than actually up at the podium, adding that levity really helps everybody get engaged. It helps everybody brighten up, because especially like in a college lecture, there are normally a lot of students there that are only there because they take attendance and grade it. So being able to keep them engaged for whatever length of time, even if it's a short presentation, can be a huge help as far as retention and involvement in the long run.
Absolutely. That
Good
makes
stuff,
sense.
Al.
Yeah.
So Sabina, do you want to talk about your perspective on this? Don't only rehearse start to finish, because I think that's a really, really good point in the article. Could you maybe expand on that?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a very, very common practice for most of us if we are in a position to rehearse and where we need to rehearse for something, that we go from start to finish. And especially for longer presentations, you're not always going to be able to do the whole thing from start to finish. So when you pick up again from the beginning, and your beginning gets rehearsed to death, which is great because you absolutely need to nail that first few sentences that come out of your mouth. However, the rest of the talk is on shaky ground. And so, and this helps if you have segments built in to pick up at random points of your script and rehearse in that order. So I start from section 4 and go up to section 10 and then backwards, or I start in backward order. What's the last thing? What's the last page of my thing, and what's the middle, and then what's the top? So you're not always just starting from the very top. You're going in random order almost. This also helps when I've worked with speech coaches, because they'll have me do a run through and then they'll say, you know, that part over there when you said this thing, and I'll just pick up right there from that part over there. And they'll go, wow, how did you do that? And well, because I've rehearsed it in all different ways. So that would be a test, is say it to somebody and ask them after they've listened to the whole thing to ask you to say something again from some random portion. And that'll also help you with some interaction to mix up the segments.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm a former military guy, and one of our sayings is that you'll only perform as well as your least amount of training. And what we mean by that is
Yes.
whatever you have not worked on is going to be highlighted in the performance in the real world. There's a great book. I love it. It's The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, How to Be Insanely Great in Front of Any Audience by Carmen Gallo. And that kind of got me started, I don't know, 15 years ago on the art of practicing and rehearsing. Because one of the things that people don't realize about Steve Jobs, they saw him up there and he was very relaxed and dynamic. And by the way, if you look on YouTube, he had a bunch of keynotes and things that went badly. As well, but where he was brilliant seemed so effortless. And in the book, what you find is he rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. He was there before anybody else to get the feel of the stage and the environment and everything. It wasn't a natural outcome for him. It was hard work. And at first I was uncomfortable. I would record myself and I hated the sound of my own voice. But I did it because in my mind, I'm like, well, if I can't handle the stress of me and the recorder, how am I going to perform in front of an audience?
Yes.
I'm going to perform at my lowest level of preparation.
I love that. So Eric, I'm taking away something here as well, and that you're only as good as your least amount of training. That's brilliant. And yes, it is rehearsing and practicing, again, not for everything, but for those specific kinds of presentations. The easier it looks, the more natural it looks, the more unnatural acts have gone into it of preparation and rehearsal. Because
you need to quote that. That is a perfect quote, Sabina. That needs to be on your LinkedIn and everywhere else. Perfect quote.
Yes, because this is what happens, is that I am actually able to be more natural, be more connected, be more engaged, be extemporaneous when I know everything cold. Then I'm not worried about, oh my gosh, what comes next. Then I can be my most natural self. And also some of the natural things are actually pre-rehearsed, like Winston Churchill's fabled ums and ahs. So yeah, absolutely. And yes, I ask for photos of the stage I'm going to be on, what kind of lighting, all kinds of things. I'm there first thing in the morning with the construction crew as they're setting up the props on the stage, have all my setup requested. One other tip for people who are speaking on stage, you want to know what colors are used in the background, because if the background is black and you're wearing a black jacket, you're going to disappear. So that's unless you're a magician and want to disappear, you want to know what the background color is.
No, that's an amazing point, and it would seem obvious, but I never thought of it before. And the other thing I like to do when I get in that environment is I will get it there as early as I can, try to work out access to the facility, make sure all my technology stuff is working. Mm-hmm. And I'll do a run through talking to myself under my voice with the mic, whatever. I run through my presentation maybe at 2 or 3 times speed, so that I've at least in that environment,
Yes.
My slides have transitioned. I've felt the floor under my feet. I've seen the lights in front of me. Like, and I've gone through it, and it's that brain not knowing the difference between imagined and real, and self-talk is
Yes.
that quick run through.
Yes. And there's something about embodying it on that stage, in the spot, in the stage. It might be very different space-wise than you had imagined from a photo. And never trust the slide deck that they've loaded.
Yeah, amen.
So many times a crucial slide somehow mysteriously went missing. And
missing an F or whatever.
Yes,
Right.
yes. Another presentation I flubbed was because they had the slide deck from 2 versions prior and had not uploaded, and I somehow, even though I thought I checked, I hadn't really checked.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff. I hope that also listeners are hearing these imperfect moments, and that people do struggle. One of the things that I try to encourage listeners is, number one, this is a journey. Like, none of us got good at it, and I'm certainly not at your level, Sabina, but I'm working that way. You didn't get there in a day. You put a lot of hard work into it. And for new leaders coming into their these professional roles, or developing into more senior roles, or finally getting really exposed to the need to present publicly, because it's hard, they will decide that they're not good enough, or they'll see somebody who does it and it feels very natural, and for them it feels very difficult, and therefore they're not good enough, they're not capable, they're not smart enough. All of this negative self-talk. Sometimes it's hard because it's hard. It's not hard because you aren't good enough. You just aren't there yet. You have to get your iterations in. You have to put the work in, but don't let something being hard convince you that you aren't good enough to get great at it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If only everybody could see behind the curtain
Mm-hmm.
of the efforts that are required. And I'm sure everybody knows that from other things that they are good at. Yesterday, I was having a conversation with a coaching client of mine who's, for her, the thing that had stood out was, apparently had told her that if your job feels easy, that's when you should be asking for more money, not less.
Right.
That means you're performing at the top of your game. You have a level of mastery of that. And that easy doesn't come easy.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. And achieving that level of mastery, there's no shortcut.
There really isn't.
There's a lot of failures behind achieving mastery.
And you have to be willing to take those failures. You have to be willing to take those lumps. Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. So let's do a quick, any other things you guys want to cover? Sabina, do you want to talk about the plan for forgetfulness and can expose the listeners to that?
Sure. And back to none of us are ever there, is it's quite possible that might stand on the stage and have another brain blank. Not just when I was in my undergrad elocution competition. And so I plan for that. Sometimes planning for that in itself gives you enough reassurance, enough confidence that you're not going to do it. In that previous scouting of my space, I scout out a place where I can hide my script.
Yep.
And I have that there. So if I'm on stage and I have a brain blank and I really need to go to that script, I can say, give me a moment. I need to go back to my safety net here. And then I know exactly where it is. The pages are splayed out, so I'm not fumbling through, oh gosh, where is it, etc. Have water with you always, drinking water. It's the best way to camouflage shortfalls, because what's more natural than taking a sip and then proceeding? And it just gives you, and water is good for you, especially if you're nervous, your throat is dry. So doing something like that is really helpful. Have 4 or 5 phrases ahead of time that you might pop out in the moment when you're forgetful, because when we're forgetful, the part of our brain that's activated does not have any language. So we may not be able to come up with even saying, oh gosh, I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Right.
So those are a few things.
That's great advice. I encourage people to develop those. You only need a couple things they're just on the forefront because you've rehearsed them. Because it creates because you don't have to think about saying, just 1 second, let me check my notes, because you've made that your go-to. It comes out and the rest of your brain's catching up. It gives you a pause in your thinking to collect your thoughts and move on, just by having that 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, quick things that are easily accessible to you, and you don't have to think about them, so your brain can focus on getting you back on track.
Exactly. Easy access, Eric. That's a key phrase. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, this has been pretty amazing. I'm very excited about this podcast and getting it out there. Let's just a quick go around the room and any closing thoughts or anything that you guys would like to explore further on a future podcast. Lisa, do you mind starting us off with that?
Sure. Thank you. No, I really appreciate the article and this time together. I've learned a tremendous amount here. And I will certainly go back and thank my dad, because he has been telling me for years that preparation prevents poor performance.
Yeah.
And, I think, here, what was reinforced is that all levels of preparation, even if it means prepared to be okay with making a mistake or going to the tools, your script that you're going to have there. And this is going to change the way that I approach future presentations, whether it's for small groups or larger groups. So I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you'll come back. Maybe we do a check back episode in 6 months, and I'd love to hear from you again on how, what have you been able to implement, and how does that feel? And because I think I know there are other listeners who are struggling with this topic. I mean, we're in 220 plus cities now. We're in 21 countries and territories. There's no way all those people are listening and nobody is enduring the same thing. But my most important question for you, Lisa, did you have fun today?
Yes, very much.
Awesome.
And I'd love to come back. Thank you.
I would love to have you back. Alex?
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered everything I had in mind. A lot of things I didn't have in mind because I didn't know. I think it was just overall a great learning experience, especially for me going through everything with school, having to do a lot more public speaking. This was extremely helpful for me.
And did you have fun?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Alex, I'm curious if you could point to one thing, what most struck you?
I think that the most important thing that I took out of this was you talking about preparing absolutely everything. Like you said, that idea of knowing it cold. Because what I've done up until this point is I sort of lay out like a road, like the path that my presentation is going to go down, without talking about without thinking about the exact words that I'm going to say. I just have a general guideline for the direction it's going. So I can see how learning every single phrase would prevent a lot of moments where you can just lock up and completely freeze.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And you had some good contributions too. So I'm glad you learned, but you also helped other people learn.
Yes.
And how about you, Sabina? Any final thoughts for the audience?
Public speaking often is considered one of the biggest fears people have,
Mm-hmm.
more than the fear of dying or visiting the dentist. And we forget that it can also be incredibly fun.
Yes.
Incredibly exhilarating. It's a huge high. If you just do a few things, again, you don't have to nail it right from the start. Allow yourself some forgiveness, allow some backup plans, and then go out and let it rip, have fun. It is some of the most fun stuff that I do. And I'm lucky that I also get paid for it.
Yeah, that's an upside. Well, did you have fun, Sabina?
Absolutely, Eric.
Awesome.
I loved your format of a panel and this interaction and this collaboration, so that we co-created what has come up for your speakers. I would love to hear what strikes them as they listen to this as well. This was great. Thank you.
That's awesome. I hope you'll come back. It's whenever we have a new guest, we just never know if it's going to click. And man, do you click with us for sure. And I hope we click with you.
Absolutely.
It's been such a pleasure to have you on.
Likewise.
Sabina, where can people find and follow you, like on social media and those types of things, websites?
Yes, so they can follow me on LinkedIn, Sabina Nawaz, Nawaz or Z, depending on the country you're in.
Yeah.
And Twitter is @Sabina Nawaz, Instagram @Sabina Coaching. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, emails roughly twice a month with my latest articles on Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Inc. You can do that through my website, sabinanawaz.com, or by emailing info@sabinanawaz.com.
Obviously, that is well rehearsed. You nailed it. Perfect. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for being guests. Listeners, thank you so much for sharing with your friends. I'm blown away that we're not even a year old yet, and we are in so many different cities. And I'm totally blown away that we are in so many different countries. So we're going to keep working hard to bring you good content, and appreciate you guys listening. Thanks.